I first got to the house, I used to think Graham was the scariest whip. And no, I'm sorry for this. You were the scariest whip. You were just... No, so
Thanks for doing
this. My
Okay, I'll just get it up.
And Ali Darling was giving the budget, or some emergency budget,
Sorry, guys.
whatever the hell was happening.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, God, it must be... And you were there.
That's not me. You need to...
Merged
You know who that is?
between the three of us, we have to share two mics, so
That is...
work out where we're
bizarre, isn't it?
So we are doing energy.
I've completely forgotten her name from Sustainability First. Sharon Darcy.
Net zero.
Got it.
That is so funny.
It's in my head.
I don't really mind, but you know. Yeah, just enjoying the fact that we've got Sharon Darcy's photo next to mine.
Really hard. And like,
Not in my one. Got you in my one.
I was just looking
The right person.
I literally just...
Right, okay.
That's why you become an MP and I...
Right, we'll get started. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for this Conservative Home event in partnership with Energy UK. My name's Angus Parsad-Wyatt from Conservative Home. Very warm welcome to all of you joining us in the marquee today, and to those watching online, and to the lovely gentleman outside with the loudspeaker, who's been a wonderful additional fixture of this conference. This event is obviously looking at energy, the future of our energy security against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine and the implications that's had on our energy supply and security, and also thinking about net zero energy and whether those two things can be helped and solved with each other. The government is obviously always trying to do 1,000,001 different things, and arguably too many different things. But in this instance, where it has aims around both delivering net zero, delivering security, and delivering good prices for consumers, there's potentially the opportunity for investment in domestic supply to solve all three of those things. So without further ado, I'll introduce our wonderful panel. We're joined by Rachel Wolfe from Public First, joined by Bim Afalami MP, by Graham Stewart, the new Minister for Climate, and by Dara Weiss from Energy UK. And thank you to Energy UK for sponsoring this event. So, Dara, can you kick us off with a little bit more about what Energy UK do and kind of building into this topic and sort of setting the scene for us all around net zero and energy security?
Yeah, thanks, Angus, and thanks to Conservative Home and Graham, Bim, and Rachel. Really glad to have such an excellent panel at a conference that has had so many energy and net zero related, cost of living crisis related events and fringe events. Really pleased that you all are here with us today. We've found, certainly me and the team from Energy UK, that there have been multiple and clashing events that we could have been at any one time. So really pleased that you're all here. Hope you agree that this is a really important topic for us to talk about. The reality is that, you know, we're in a really unusual place right now. I think it's fantastic that the government have extended support to households and businesses for this winter. What that's done is given the industry some breathing space to think about what next. And most importantly, what that's done is, I really do feel like I'm at a fun fair, I'm sorry. So I expect some candy floss and a helter-skelter. But sorry. What that's done is given consumers the help and support they need for this winter. I don't think we should make any mistake. You know, we do know, and the industry is well aware, that prices are still double what they were this time last year, and far too many people are still going to struggle this winter, as all of you will know, and as our members know, because the calls and requests for help and support across the businesses are, you know, higher than they would usually be during summer, and will be incredibly high this winter. So we're not blasé about the extent of support that we've received from government, and also the fact that actually people will need more and more. It's going to be a tough winter. So, you know, where are we on this? I think, you know, we're at Energy UK, we represent over 100 businesses. Our members supply up to about generate about 80% of the power the UK uses, and our members supply 95% of homes and buildings across the country. We also have lots and lots of members who are active and involved across the system on things like new energy services, heat, EVs, and that interesting flex demand aggregator space. So we really do have a view across the system, and we're not advocating for just one technology. And I think that's a really, really important point. We're certainly, I think there's real consensus about the need to rapidly ramp up investment in sovereign, low-carbon sources of energy, and that is about, increasing the rollout of nuclear, CCUS, offshore wind, primarily because we need to reduce our reliance on importing gas and make sure that we are, investing in and growing those sectors of our economy, because they have a huge impact on jobs and skills across the country. Decarbonisation could deliver 1.7 million jobs and lead to about £330 billion of boost in the economy by 2030. That's no small amount, and I think it could do even more if we were to make sure the conditions are right to deliver even more. So I think, in that space, it's really important and really glad to see the government taking such a pro-growth, pro-investment agenda, and something we really want to invest in as an industry. But I do also think, one of the things we need is the right conditions to ensure that we've got the companies that invest in energy have that confidence. Ultimately, investing in energy is long-term investment horizons. We're looking 10, 15, 20 years, and chopping and changing regulatory frameworks, policy and governance makes that much, much harder to do. This is a global energy crisis. We've got, global gas prices have really had a huge impact on our economy and will continue to. We need to really think about, we're competing globally for the same sort of investment across the world. We need to make sure the UK is where companies want to invest and where we want to be. Two more points I'll make. One is around the retail energy market, which is struggling right now. Our retail energy companies, I think, are really well placed. They have reach into every single home across the country, and they're the ones who could really deliver energy efficiency, decarbonising homes, and also improving access to the way that people can use energy when it's cheapest, most plentiful on the system, flexibility, things like that. So I think we need a real big push on reducing demand, and I'm sure other panellists are going to come on to this, but reducing demand either at grid scale and also through homes and buildings and improving energy efficiency, I think really, really important that government considers how it can be more active in that space, because our homes are, form part of our national infrastructure.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dara. And Bim, as chair for the Renewable and Sustainable Energy APPG, you're obviously doing a lot of work on looking at how we can be improving the sustainability of our energy supply. Perhaps you can, as a sort of by way of introduction, take us a bit more through the work that you're doing there.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly alongside the new Minister, Graham Stewart, who knows a lot about this stuff. I'll start by explaining that though I am a proud member of the Conservative Environment Network, I work on the Renewable and I chair the Renewable and Sustainable Energy APPG, one of the problems that we see in the global energy market is a structural imbalance between the demand for energy and the amount of energy that is there. And I make that point globally because what we see is that you have the developing world, which demand is increasing way faster than the amount of energy totally that we are producing. Now, why have I started with this statistic? The reason is that high energy prices are not just because of the war in the Ukraine. They are because the war in the Ukraine has exacerbated the problem significantly, particularly around natural gas. We know that issues around the pipeline from Eastern Europe, from Russia to Eastern Europe, etc. But actually, there is something deeper going on in the global energy market, which means that we're going to have to explain to the public, not just in this country but elsewhere, that at the same time as developing a more renewable, cleaner and greener energy system, we're also going to have to provide more oil and gas. And we're going to have to do both of those things. Over time, we will need less and less oil and gas. But right now, if you end up in a scenario where we do not get investment going into new fields for oil and gas globally, you end up with a scenario which is that energy becomes so expensive that you create not only social, economic problem and political problems for people in different countries, but you end up with different countries on an emergency basis burning coal. And that is the worst conceivable thing we can do. So I start by saying that, and I don't think that that point is fully appreciated everywhere. In relation to this country, it's quite clear the two issues are cost of energy, and how secure it is of our supply. I'll leave it up to Graham to describe how he's going to deal with all these problems, beyond to say that it is clear that one of the things that we need to work out, the thorniest, toughest thing we need to work out, is how on earth we improve our energy efficiency without having a Byzantine government scheme that is a sort of macro version of the Green Homes Grant, which didn't work very well at all. And by the way, I say that not because the people who worked on it didn't try hard or the department did a poor job. It's just very, very hard to design these things. We're going to have to work out a way of incentivizing the private market to develop the solutions for every single home or owner of a building that means that we can actually insulate our properties. Because if we can do that both in the short and long term, that not only provides economic benefit to the country, people are employed doing the jobs, the materials are made, etc., but it will reduce the cost of energy. And the last thing around energy security, there are people who don't like wind farms or think that it's all mumbo-jumbo, all this green stuff, what I'd say to them is, you either have more wind or rely more on Putin and other parts of the world. It is the argument for renewable energy in this country, and that goes for nuclear as well, is not even primarily an environmental argument, if you don't want to make it. The argument is one about security of supply. And with all the reforms to the energy market that I know we are thinking of doing and hopefully starting to do, that will mean that the cost of the renewable energy will be separated, will be cheaper, and will be separated out from the cost of wholesale market for gas, which is completely different, but yet they're all priced at gas level. If we can do the difficult contract work to do that, and as a former corporate lawyer and banker, I'm available on a very good hourly rate. No, but if we can separate that out, then I think that we can have a safe, secure, cheaper, greener, more renewable energy system in this country.
Thanks, Bim. And Rachel, from a policy perspective, in terms of how you get the right policies and how we sell that to people, how we get people engaged in this on the top levels, I think there's a lot of noise around this debate, and it's trying to get cut through in that. How do we do that?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me. So I'll make a couple of very, very simple, hopefully cut-through points, and I'll pick up a lot on what Bim has said. I think the first thing we have to recognise is that the world is getting scarier, that the imbalance between supply and demand, the invasion of Ukraine, are likely to be two of many events over the next decades, and that therefore security in its broadest term, but energy security within that, has to be a huge priority of this and any government, because energy is what our entire economy is based on. So that's the first fairly obvious thing. The second is that I think often, and this picks up from what Bim was saying, we have a environmental argument that is somewhat out of date, because the reason why you would promote renewable energy supply right now is because it's secure and cheap. It is one of the ways in which you create a energy supply that you can rely on in a very uncertain world in which nation states are becoming ever more dominant. The third thing I would say is that reducing energy demand also makes energy more secure and cheaper. This last year, my company does a lot of polling and focus groups. The cost of living has been the dominant concern of the public to a scale that we have never seen before. So when I was doing polling before the 2019 election, Brexit, NHS, they were very high in the polls. They were nothing compared to how desperate people across the country, including most Conservative voters, felt about the cost of living. And until we both find a way to have secure, cheap energy supply and reduce the demand for energy, the risk is that that happens again. And that is the sort of thing that not only topples particular governments, but creates genuine unrest. So to me, the kind of net zero security cost tension no longer clearly exists, certainly for a large portion of what we want to do. I'll just then very briefly talk about public opinion. The public across demographics and across classes are in favour of environmental action. They want to leave a better country to their children and grandchildren. And unlike other countries like America, there's actually very little polarisation on the environment and net zero in this country, providing people think that they can pay for their bills, which is the central question. And at least at the moment, although this may change, people understand that external events are to blame for what has happened and do not see a trade-off between those environmental aims and cost and security. I think that, and before I finish, the government has obviously stepped in a huge way on energy bills, and it was necessary to survive and morally necessary. It is very important to remember that people are still much poorer because they have bills that are double last year. And I think it is critical from a public opinion and electoral point of view, as well as from an energy security and net zero point of view, to have a pathway towards getting those bills down, and down in the medium and long term. Because in the end, people will not vote to be poorer. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. We're being reminded of the power of wind as we speak. And finally, in the sort of introductory session, Minister, welcome, and thank you for joining the panel. I'm conscious that you are early on into your time as the new Minister for Climate, but if you would please give us a sense of some of the challenges that we're facing and some of the work that is already well underway to tackle this really important issue.
Well, thank you. I mean, the first thing to say is that our energy security is, and don't take this the wrong way, but is pretty good because we, unlike the rest of Europe, are not dependent on Russian gas. I think less than 4% of our gas supply was from Russia in 2021. We've got the second largest LNG capacity here in the UK. We've done our world-leading offshore wind development, onshore solar. We have a tremendous mix of energy types. So for the most part, our problem has not been security of supply, it has been the price, which is driven by that marginal gas price in the system. Having said all that, because of the dependence which others allowed to subsist or even increase on Russian gas and then the Ukrainian invasion, that has knock-on impacts, so that we've had to prepare and working closely with National Grid to look at all scenarios coming into this winter. First thing to say is on most of those, we don't. There will be announcements coming out soon, but basically we are reasonably secure, but there are always risks. So what we going forward, we need to carry on, as we said, investing in renewables because they are domestic and add to our strength here. We are looking to secure supplies for the long term. Norway is our biggest single supplier of gas. The Langeled, the world's longest gas pipeline, comes into my constituency. And altogether they provide about 38% of our gas. So securing that for the long term is something which we're working on. And Maddie McTernan is leading a task force, she was the person who helped secure the vaccines. She's now working on securing our energy supplies in the long term as well. So we've got in between National Grid, who are also working on the demand side, looking to ensure that that doesn't impinge on domestic consumers, but looking to develop proposals with major energy users to find ways of compensating them if required in order to provide additional flex. So, we mustn't be complacent, but our basic position is of a pretty good level of energy security, coupled with actions which we're taking to try and make sure that even in pretty extreme circumstances that we would still be able to handle the situation. And that's what everyone is working on. Where would we be if we hadn't gone from the pitiful 7% of our electricity being generated by renewables when Labour left government to the 40% that we enjoy today, if we hadn't led the world in doing that, if we hadn't come up with the CFDs, the Contracts for Difference, which is now widely copied model, which, for those of you who remember the first auction we did in 2015 had £120 per megawatt hour was what they were required before they would put their turbines into the North Sea. And by 2019, 2 auctions later, it was down to £39.50. Absolutely nobody involved anticipated or predicted that we would have seen that transformational impact of providing sufficient certainty going forward for business, for the pipeline, for the supply chain to invest and drive that cost down. And we're now moving to annual auctions going forward. So I think we've done a pretty good job on that point of view. And of course, those CFDs, because they guaranteed a level of revenue, they meant that if the prices went very high, as they are today, then those energy producers are paying money back into the pot and thus reducing energy costs. And that's perhaps a story that's not told as widely as it should be. It's tens of billions of pounds this year has been paid by producers back into the pot, thus lowering costs going forward. So we need to do more of that. We are investing heavily in nuclear, which again we believe is safe. And we have community support in various areas around the country to see that developed. Yes, I'm waiting for my candy floss now as the music really gets going. But so we have the nuclear piece coming forward as well, and we need to keep pressing on with the other renewables. So in terms of the costs, which I think is really important, solar, large-scale solar is the cheapest. It's often said to be onshore wind. I think it's large-scale solar is the cheapest current energy producer that there is, second to ahead of onshore wind. And what we have seen, as I say, is that offshore wind coming down to a remarkably competitive point, which has not only helped us, but it's transformed the economics of offshore wind for the rest of the world. So as a trade minister, I was going to Taiwan, and we ended up with a lot of UK supply into helping them there, or indeed in northeast United States, offshore wind being developed there as well. Just the other thing, just to add in terms of a less positive aspect, I guess, is because as Bim, I think, said earlier, there's a lot of pressure on, even without Ukraine, there was pressure on the energy market. And China has still not returned to its sort of typical growth rates. And so if China's economy starts to rev up again in the coming year, that's one of the reasons why the challenges could be stronger still in not this winter, but the winter after this, which is why, again, we're putting a lot of work in to try and prepare for that and make sure that we're in the most resilient position going forward. The final point, just again picking up on a point Bim made, is around the transition challenges. Once there are issues around ensuring that we have the supply going forward, you've seen basically in the fossil fuel sector, quite rightly, we want to see that go down as we lift the renewables, but there's always a danger that you actually don't have the refining, you don't have the other capacity which you need, which can then exacerbate costs in the meantime. So it's another aspect of managing the transition in a way that works not only for the environment but also works environmentally. And as a final point, we want secure energy going forward, and I'm confident that we will be able to do that over the coming years. But we also need to focus on trying to have a competitive price because energy is at the base of every single activity in our country. And if we can engineer our way to a place which is not only net zero compliant, but also at the most competitive price level, then that is going to be a fundamental part of securing our prosperity in the long term, which is another important factor in which to keep in mind. Thank you, Angus.
Thank you, Graham. And I know Ben wants to follow up with a question to you off the back of that.
Look, Graham, thanks very much for that. I mean, on nuclear, which I think, I completely agree with you is critically important. When you look at building nuclear power stations, not just in this country but elsewhere, everywhere it seems to take forever to build these things. And I just wondered what the latest thinking is from within government on how do we actually get these things built faster. I repeat, this is not a uniquely British problem. But, what are the latest ideas on how we achieve that?
Well, the fundamentals were, we did the first ever commercial nuclear power station in the world, but then our skills were lost. And what the problem everywhere, as I understand it, and as rightly been said, I've only been in this job a little while, so I should be here as much to listen as to talk, but that's not the nature of politics. What we've got lost is the skill set, and what we've got to do is have regular drumbeat of production. That's why we're looking to have reactor after reactor after reactor. You are going to have, when you have to do something from scratch again, you're going to have problems. As you do the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth, you will find your costs coming down, you will find efficiencies improve, you will improve what you do. So the most important single thing we need to do is have, along with allies, is a consistent program of development of nuclear, and then we will see costs and efficiencies improve. And also once you get that program in place with the skills and the rest of it around it, then you can ensure that you've got a pipeline for the businesses to invest, which can accelerate the performance all round.
So this event is obviously thinking about the future, how we prevent a future crisis. And I know there's obviously been an old clip dug up of a former Deputy Prime Minister negating nuclear energy at the time and saying that obviously it would not come on stream until 2022, which would have been very, very useful around about now. So we obviously have to be a bit more forward-thinking. And with that, I guess, and I'll go to Dara first on this question, but how do we prevent a future crisis? And I guess if you had one, two, or maybe three top things that you want to see from government helping to prevent that future crisis, what would they be?
Oh, wow. So how do we prevent a future crisis? I mean, this is not necessarily a crisis of our own making. We are part of a global community in this sense, in terms of the impacts on us are often due to activity elsewhere, which fellow panelists have talked about. In terms of three things, I think, one is that stable regulatory policy and governance environment that I talked about. I think that the reality is on that investment innovation side, we've seen a lot of stop, start, chop and change, and what our industry really needs is a strong, kind of stable and something you'd bet on, right? Why invest in the UK? Let's make it the best place to invest, because that has a knock-on effect. That helps with levelling up. That means investments in jobs and skills. The energy industry is set to invest £100 billion in the next decade, and is really up for the challenge. So there's that stability that we need, and alongside that there is a little bit of hard work. We do need to be thinking about what is the regulatory and institutional governance framework that we need. Is the current situation fit for purpose? So there's that. And in terms of the other two things, I think one is around REMA. BIM touched on the decoupling of gas and electricity prices, and it's something we've talked about a little bit just actually before I came to take my seat. I think that it's really important that the review of electricity market arrangements is done in a considered way, with all the right economic analysis and policy impacts considered, because it's potentially really big, and rushing it could result in something similar to the EMR, which I don't think went as far as anybody wanted it to go, and that was 10 years ago. So I do think it's a delicate balancing act, and I understand the desire to bring forward decoupling, but there are potential unintended consequences that could end up quite costly on people's bills if we did rush it. So in the meantime, I think there's something around the idea of a voluntary CFD to give investors that long-term security whilst also bringing down prices in the short to medium term. So that conversation about the potential for a voluntary CFD for projects currently on a RO contract is a live one, and should be something that is really seriously considered. And then thirdly, and again, Rachel and others have touched on it, is demand reduction, right? We should really be talking about this as a nationally important, more important now than ever, both in terms of homes, buildings, but also at that grid scale. It's a space where ultimately, if we result in warmer, safer, more comfortable homes, the knock-on impacts across both the economy and society are huge. You know, it has a huge impact on helping the NHS. It helps people with their mental health and physical health, and also the safety and security you get from a warm, comfortable home. And energy efficiency is a huge part of that.
Thanks, Tara. And I guess question for you, Graham, off the back of that, in terms of that demand question and the energy usage, that a lot of the work that the government's doing at the moment around the price cap, with the comms around the price cap, are very much about setting a level, setting a price, and consumers rightly believe that to be the price that they'll pay. And we're not necessarily putting enough focus on the message around energy usage and reducing usage. Is there work likely to be coming forward to improve the comms around how much energy people are actually using and how that's being used?
Well, we've done quite a lot of work on that, and actually find it's harder than you might think for the government to put messages over to people in a way which they accept. We're not necessarily seen as the best people to tell people how to do that. That's not just a personal comment on Jacob and myself, although it might be accurate, but it's finding other interlocutors by which to do it. So we're looking to use the energy price guarantee by communicating that so people understand how it works, and use that as a way at the same time of sharing with people ways in which they can lower their costs. But it's interesting. I was just reading this morning sort of analysis of different countries around Europe and what they're doing to try and encourage and work in this space. It's not always straightforward how best to get those messages over and who best to do it. But as a completely unrelated to that particular point, and of course one of the other resilience aspects we have is by being interconnected. So rather than just looking at doing everything for ourselves, it's our interconnectors that help make us more secure, and that's why we have ambitions to increase that, which fits in with improving the energy security both of our neighbours and of ourselves, and of giving us the infrastructure to allow us to become an energy exporter in the future. And that should be an ambition, given the vast natural resources we have and renewable resources we have. We should capture that, and we should sell that energy, and that's part and parcel of building a system which is both super affordable, makes us competitive as an economy, and is also helps provide for the energy security of our neighbours and ourselves. So we're big believers in that as well.
Thank you. And Rachel, you touched on cost and the very real fear that people have around the price of energy. And in the framing of this transition to net zero, that is obviously not cheap in of itself, both for government in terms of investing in nuclear and onshore and offshore wind, and in terms of for individuals, for households where people are sort of encouraged to take up heat pumps that might cost thousands of pounds or other kind of technologies. Is now the right time, against this backdrop where people are very conscious of costs, is now the right time to be doing this? Or is it something that needs to be looked at again in a few years' time?
I mean, I actually think that the last year or so, and it will continue to be true now, is the optimum time to try and persuade people that insulation and reducing energy demand is sensible, because people right now are really quite concerned about how they lower their bills. And while there are quite a lot of people who need significant financial support up front to do that, there are also people who don't, who are also not insulating their homes and are also not doing any of these things. So I actually think the salience of this has gone up very substantially, and all the polling that we've done shows that people do think there should be large measures for energy efficiency and improvement now, and think so more than they did a year ago. So I don't see that tension. It is obviously more generally true that people's support for net zero will disappear if they think that what you're trying to do is make them much poorer. There's a sort of small strand in the environmental sort of world, which is sort of all about degrowth, and how actually this is a chance for us to like go back to some halcyon previous world where everyone was poor and people died in childbirth. And that doesn't tend to play very well on the doorstep. But I think what actually the things we've done over the last decade to support net zero, and some things we could do now, make things cheaper as well as more secure. This seems to me a great news story we should be talking about.
Yeah. And Bim, understandably, we are talking a lot about the kind of economic side of this. And this new administration is obviously almost entirely focused on growth. And that is everything is seen through the prism of growth. So are we in danger of losing the messaging a little bit in reference to net zero around the environmental impact, the emissions impact, and why we're doing it, rather than it just being about the financial side? Because a time hopefully will come, hopefully soon, when the pressure is off a little bit in terms of the economic impact for people, and we need to sort of get back to banging the drum for why this is good from an environmental perspective.
I think that's a good question. I mean, personally, I don't think that I've never met anybody who says, I'm going to vote for you to achieve more growth. People say, I'm going to vote for you in order to earn more money, to move to a better house, to have a better job, to have more opportunities, to have a better school, etc., etc. So I think that within that framework, you can say that this is going to make your life, I mean, following from what Rachel said, you know, this is going to make your life better because your bills will be lower, your home will be warmer in the winter, you will live in a cleaner environment. I mean, one of the advantages with, for example, electric cars, I know it's a bit of a digression, but in essence, one of the advantages of them is that they're quiet and they are clean. They do not pump out emissions into the local atmosphere. Forget the greenhouse, right? Just think of the streets in an urban area. It's just a lot nicer if you weren't pumping out loads of emissions, right? So actually to say to people, this is good because your life is going to be better, is a good outcome. Now, I'm not ducking the hard bit about how do you pay for it, because it's also important that you explain to people that there are often upfront costs for things that will benefit you later. But I think that this is the sort of thing, I often don't think politicians give people enough credit in terms of people can distinguish between you put something in today to get a lot more out tomorrow, as long as they understand that that thing tomorrow will actually happen and they believe in it. And so and I think energy efficiency is probably the most important thing that we can do up front, that the government will have to help a lot of people pay for, probably not everybody, but if we can do that in a way that people know will reduce their costs and make their homes nicer and warmer in the winter. And you know, we're a country that for about half the year is just not very warm, so it's actually better if you insulate your homes properly. Then I think that's a good outcome. I don't think it's a good idea to say, don't worry, we're moving from a growth narrative to an environmental narrative, because both of those things aren't going to work. It's about saying we want to grow the economy so that our lives are better. We want to go to net zero so that our lives are better as well.
Thank you, Bim. I'm conscious there's a lot of you here, so we'll open up to some questions from the floor. Whilst the mics come round, firstly, when I call you, if you could just say your name and if you're from a business or an association where you're from, and if you could please keep it concise, because I can see a lot of hands already. Please give us a question rather than a comment or a statement. Anything that starts with more of a comment, really, will not be welcome. So please keep it to short questions. And we'll start with the gentleman with his hand raised on the side there.
I'm putting solar on my house and it's about a 4-year payback time. If it's wholesale, it's like 1 year. We're spending £100 billion on the gas industry, just giving them cash. That would get 100 gigawatts of solar panels, making 100 terawatt hours of electricity a year. Why the heck are we not doing that? It's a third of our energy from solar for the same price as just profits for the gas industry.
Minister, do you want to come in on this one?
Sure. I mean, just to say we are spending, I think, £6 billion over this Parliament on supporting people with energy efficiency measures and eco and various other schemes. But to say, trying to get an interesting area to look at is to try and understand the barriers in the way of solar when it makes complete economic sense. Too often you can have, for instance, rented properties. The tenant and the landlord have such different interests that actually, even though it's economic to do it, it doesn't happen because of a kind of market failure, and working out how to fix that so that you have more roofs. I was the trade envoy to Vietnam, so a British company there going over putting solar on the roofs of these factories right across Vietnam, and that not happening here, even though it's cost effective and you get a good return on the investment. So it's trying to make sure that we find ways of making more of that happen makes sense to me. But I don't think it's for lack of effort, but it hasn't yet been fully unlocked. But a lot is going on.
One of the things on that point is that, you know, we're going to need a lot more electricity in the future as we electrify heat, as well as do lots of other things with electricity. Ben talked about electric vehicles, electric fleet. So, you know, I agree. We do need we need a mix, and all of the evidence and research, from whether you're talking about the Climate Change Committee or the Energy System Operator, future energy scenarios, all point to a good mix. To your suggestion in particular, I think it's one of those areas where actually there is potential to make it easier. And one of those things is, you know, around those basic points around sort of planning, consenting, listed buildings, conservation, etc. So I think there are some roadblocks in the way there, and it's really important to remember there was a survey, I think, that a couple of years ago, like over 80% of Conservative Party members would welcome a renewable energy project in their area. So I do think the appetite is there.
Not sure that's actually true.
I read it somewhere, Bim, it's true.
There is a way that things just get slowed down. So one of the graphs I was shown when I first got appointed a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was here was the offshore wind production over the years, and there was going up. A very similar chart showing me how long it took for an offshore wind project to get through to development, and it basically had gone up. So it was like 3 years, 10 years ago to 10 years today. So part of my role is to be a co-chairman of the Offshore Wind Acceleration Task Force, one of these ghastly alphabet soups, but precisely to try and wrestle with how these permissioning issues. I mean, you've got some issues around, I mean, with large-scale solar being the cheapest form of energy that we can get, and again, there are issues there about permissioning and the speed and the different interests. So there's, as you rightly said, though, it turns out there's quite a lot of barriers in the way, even though we'd all look at it and go, well, this is cheap, it's practical, we should be getting on with it. So I certainly agree with your impatience.
Gentleman at the back in the centre there.
Here we are, partway through.
It'll be on, just speaking to it.
Partway through the winter, and we realise that we're going to reach £2,500 expenditure on our electricity.
Sorry, if you just speak into the mic, just angle it at you.
Okay, so sorry. William Whitelow, Hertfordshire. Partway through the winter, we reach the point where we get to a spend of £2,500 on our electricity. How do you then stop me from feeling that, oh, it doesn't matter now, the government's going to pay for me, so I might as well keep the heating on a bit more than I was doing? Could you not find a way of forcing, or certainly encouraging people in that situation to at least invest it in their own home improvements?
Thank you. We've got a communication issue there. The £2,500 is not a cap. The typical household will, on average, thanks to our intervention at the firm level, on expected usage, have a bill of £2,500. If you use more energy, you will pay more than £2,500. It is, on average, the typical family will pay no more than that. But if you use more energy, your bill will be higher. So I apologise for the fact that that hasn't been as crystal clear as we'd like it to be.
So, where in Hertfordshire are you as a Hertfordshire MP? Well, anyway, the reason why I asked was whether you're in a rural area or not. And in constituencies like mine, and maybe the one that you're in, often rural areas, and I can speak in my own constituency, almost all of my villages are on heating oil. They're not on gas. And I've had a lot of people come to me and say, well, what's happening around oil? So I think that that's another area where I think, particularly in rural areas where people are on oil, we need to just be clearer with the public over the coming weeks about exactly how this is going to work, because I think it's quite complicated and not everybody understands fully.
Great, thank you. I'm conscious there's a lot of hands, so I'm going to start grouping questions. If I can take the two in the middle of the two who've already asked questions, then I'll work my way down here.
Hiya, Helena Bennett, Head of Climate Policy at Green Alliance. Really pleased to hear you talking about decoupling and REMA. Would love to hear from the panel if they're leaning more towards a locational pricing model or like a green power pool model or a bit of a mixture or something else.
Okay, so location pricing model, and the gentleman in the back behind, you just pass it 2 rows back for me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Cairns. I'm from Equinor, the Norwegian energy company that sends all its gas through Graham's constituency, that built Dogger Bank with SSE, cheap offshore wind, and is building hydrogen CCUS also in your constituency. My question is about opportunity rather than crisis, and this is opportunity for the UK to play a greater role in the continent of Europe. So, Bim, you talked about demand for energy, and globally that's going to double by 2050. It's going to double. The UK, from our seat, has this great chance to have more of a show in provision of electricity to the continent of Europe, of supplying CCUS storage for the continent of Europe, and also remaining oil and gas. All the discussion here, of course, is about crisis and defensiveness, but does this sense of opportunity, is that hit a chord at all, or are we still in being defensive mode? Thanks.
Thanks, Gerard. Who wants to come in on location pricing or opportunity?
Well, location pricing, it's a lot of that is down to the grid, and we would very much like to see, I mean, we haven't talked about the grid, but because there's quite a lot of a delay for people to get their development production into the system, and I think getting grid changes can contribute, as I understand it, to making it possible for the sort of location pricing to happen, and will be a sign of a opportunity for competition in grid services in local areas. On the opportunity front, I mean, our offshore wind has been tremendous, but I'm not sure we built the UK capability, industrial capability that we would have liked to have done as a result of the global leadership we showed. And going forward, certainly it's a mission of mine that as we not only develop these opportunities, but we seek to get companies, whether they're British or not, to see the UK as the ideal place to invest and then from which to export expertise and indeed products around the world. It's a huge opportunity. The numbers are immense, and if you're leaning ahead of everyone else, and we've cut our emissions more than any other G20 nation on earth. We've led the way internationally on, I don't think anyone's done more than us in negotiations. Alok Sharma, we can all be proud of his performance as president of the COP. Just 30% of global GDP was covered by net zero pledges when he took over the presidency, and it's now 90%. So you take that, you take our leadership on ETS and seeing that expanding out, so the emissions trading scheme, to put a price on carbon most effectively. There are the demand signals, the buying signals from around the world, the alignment of markets around the world and in Europe is going to be enormous, and the UK has a phenomenal prosperity opportunity and the opportunity both to lead the world in reducing emissions, but also develop and move out of this crisis mode into a big, as you say, an opportunity mode, David, in becoming very much wealthier as a result of our helping the whole planet move to net zero.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions down here. So this gentleman on the end here and the lady next to him as well, please.
Hi there, John Johnston from Politics Home. A question for Graham and Bim. There's not really been much talk of fracking, but it's deeply unpopular with many people in your party. There's widespread scepticism about whether it will have any impact on energy security. Was it a misstep for the government to focus on this so much in the recent weeks?
Okay, and...
Thank you. Claire Bottle, Chief Executive of the UK Warehousing Association. Only 5% of warehouses in the UK have any solar panels at all on the roof, which is an absolute disgrace. As an industry, we're working really hard, and as the trade body, we're providing toolkits for all of our 900 member companies to help overcome some of the challenges about tenants and landlords, which I think you touched upon, Graham. But the big issue that we can't deal with as an industry is the inequity of access to the grid due to the monopolistic DNOs, the district network operators. I know that REMA may have the opportunity to help us address it, but it's so obtuse, it's really difficult for people to understand how to respond to that consultation. Could you give any guidance on how companies and their trade bodies can get their message across to government, please?
Well, I'll take, just on yours, Madam, I agree. I think that the system of how the DNOs work needs to be looked at. And, you know, I'm with you, and I'll do whatever I can to help you in that endeavour. In relation to fracking, it's my view, it was my view a year ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, and now, that there are two reasons why I think that you could want to do fracking. One is cost, and if it maybe reduces the cost of energy, maybe it's worth doing. And there's nowhere that it says that even if we fracked everywhere we could in the UK, that it would reduce the cost. So I don't think that works. The second one is security of supply, insofar as at least we've got supply here, but it would wouldn't even get close to the total amount that we needed. And the deep unpopularity of it in so many local areas, and look, you know, it's not in my area, but there are so many of my colleagues on the record for a very long time about it, it just strikes me as difficult well, rather, I don't really understand why we're doing so much great stuff. I mean, we've heard from Graham all the stuff the government's doing. Broadly, over the last 12 years, we've been doing the right things on energy, and it's just odd that we've almost gone down this particular rabbit hole, which is very minimal in the overall context of all the great work that's going on. So, you know, unless lots of people in local areas change their mind, I'd be surprised if we get much fracking, and I think it looks a bit like a misfocus.
Rachel, do you want to come in on fracking in terms of sort of public opinion and just building on Bim's point?
Yeah, it's not going to happen because people don't like it in their area. It's just it's got nothing to do with the theory of energy supply. If you think that MPs oppose local solar because of public concern, you should see how people feel about fracking. And I have no objection to it in principle. I just don't see how you overcome that barrier. I mean, honestly, it is as simple as that. People hate it.
Graham, anything you want to add on in terms of kind of access to the grid on that second point?
Well, I think I just agree with Claire on the issues around it. One of the areas I want to put a lot of focus on is understanding the grid issues. Even globally, as I say, from my previous role doing with the Vietnamese, they have EVN, the state nationalized grid there. So again, if you can't access the grid and you can't do it in a reasonable way, if there are interests that stand in the way, you need to understand them and you need to change the system so that you can ensure that you align, which is primary job of politicians, is to align, create frameworks that align the incentives of the actors with the public good you seek, rather than necessarily fiddling with the internal machinery of it all. So we've got to try and do that. On fracking, you know, we don't know whether it's going to be economically viable or not to extract. There's been so little done, so that work needs to go on, and as been said, it'll need local consent if it's going to happen. But we need to find out whether it's got whether it's economically viable or not. I'm quite confident of our regulatory system to ensure that below ground there will not be problems, and we're not going to be poisoning or aquifers or anything like that. It'll be properly done, but it'll require community consent, and that'll very much function of what happens on the surface as well to ensure that people are content. And if they can be persuaded and it's economically viable, then for all the reasons given, it should happen. But it would also need people to be persuaded of that for then their local area. And if it isn't, then it won't be.
Dara?
I won't comment on fracking because it's all been said, but I think on your points around complications, I think, you know, REMA, the review of electricity market arrangements is it needs to do two things. We need to review the way that the power market works right now. We need to expand generation capacity, which we've talked about, but we also need to reduce future system costs, and that also means we need to be thinking about how we make sure that the market's ready for a dynamic energy system where we really incentivize flexible technologies and using energy when it's cheapest. So to the point around complexities around REMA, well, our team in the office today are scrambling around to meet the deadline of later this week. So if you want, we can talk about it afterwards.
Thank you. So next question, lady at the back. And the gentleman at the very back as well, behind.
Thank you. Hi, Kate Young from the Aldersgate Group. My question is to you, Minister. Warmly welcome to hear your comments on renewables deployment and grid capacity, but I wonder if we could hear your specific thoughts on energy efficiency. Can we hope to expect something big from government in the coming future?
Thank you. And the gentleman standing up at the back.
Also from the Aldersgate.
Sorry, this wasn't planned, but Nick Moller, Executive Director at the Aldersgate Group. We're a cross-economy business organisation. We talked a lot about the role of decarbonising energy supplies to help with cost of living and the energy security crisis, but there's also a big job creation opportunity here. So does the panel have any thoughts around how we can maximise job creation opportunities as we decarbonise?
Graham, do you want to come in on those points?
I mean, on the energy efficiency, obviously it is tremendously important and an area that deserves lots and lots of focus, and which I'm not, so far, I can't claim any great massive expertise, but I'm sure that will follow working with my ministerial colleagues across the piece. On job creation, it's getting the skills right and making sure that we, if you take, just taking the insulation and retrofitting, that requires signals to build up labour forces, apprenticeships, etc., for the long term in order that people are confident to do it. We've got to get that in place. But right across the piece, from offshore wind to solar to everything else, nuclear, we're going to need the skills, and that's why we have put a lot of work into that, working with industry to take forward and develop an understanding of what a green job is, and making sure that we understand the market and the requirements and the numbers, and then that we have metrics to ensure that we put those in place. Otherwise, all the great companies and the members of the Aldersgate Group are not going to have the people and the skills in order to deliver their plans, even if they've got the money, the permissions and the rest of it. So we've got to, as ever, we've got to coordinate all these factors together, and skills and jobs are fundamental to it, and are really exciting. Again, go back to the opportunity piece, so exciting that so much of what we will do naturally in this country is in areas which typically were dependent on high carbon jobs before, and for whom we need, for a just transition, we need to provide opportunity going forward. So we've got to get that in place. We've got to make sure that we've got whole system join up, and that's why on our green jobs, I've forgotten the exact name of it, task force group, we've got DFE and other government representatives, along with myself and my industry co-chair, to make sure that we get these things in place.
Rachel, do you want to come?
Yeah, just very quickly. Green jobs has consistently been one of the most successful messages to the public in terms of why you would want to decarbonise. I think the problem is that at some point people notice whether they're employed or not, and in what. So it's useful if those jobs actually appear, and it links to quite a lot of the different questions. To me, the most exciting thing by far that this new government is committed to is what they call in broad terms supply-side reform, but it seems to me mostly to be trying to build things faster. And generally those things fail because of local problems and local planning problems. So for the people in this room who are engaged in this world, it seems to me the most useful thing that can be done right now is to try and support the government's aim to build some stuff faster, because otherwise there won't be any green jobs, there won't be any new energy supply, and we will be having exactly the same abstract conversation in a decade as we are now.
Thank you. Next few questions. If we can go to the gentleman sat at the back there first, with the glasses.
If I could just follow up on the skills point, because I think that's really interesting. It's prime time now, really, to be retrofitting our homes and installing technologies on the home because of the rise in energy prices. But what we know is that the supply chain is not ready, and the skills aren't there. And this is a short-term problem, not a long-term problem. And you can take the example of the lead times on some of the inverters at the moment. You're waiting months for those when we need to get those installed in winter. How much of a barrier do you see this as, and how do we overcome that short-term problem specifically?
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman in the middle down here for me, please.
Richard McCarthy from the Data and Communications Company. We talked, and you've talked very positively about the importance of demand and demand-side measures. Information is power, and information is critical to making demand-side measures work. So you'll be aware the ESO is working with us to ensure that smart meters are the route to making demand-side measures deliver. So we have 30 million smart meters now in this country. We have 23 million to go. Will Energy UK and will the government take action to speed up the rollout so that consumers have power to exercise demand-side measures and the national grid has the up-to-date half-hourly data it needs to enable more demand-side measures to work on that grid?
Thanks very much. Dara, do you want to come in on that, the point around smart meters and also thinking about skills pipeline, obviously as the trade association?
Yeah, the conversations around the skills pipeline, you know, the figures are there for that investment in domestic clean energy generation, low carbon generation. Any of our members in the room, if you talk to any of them, they'll have an amazing story to tell you about the impact they have on local communities and the kind of really highly skilled, well-paid jobs that do come out of investing in low carbon generation. But on that retrofit side, yes, there's a problem, and there's a problem because of the boom and bust nature of investment in energy efficiency over the years. It does need to be, I think the energy industry and retailers have done a lot on energy efficiency because eco's the only thing that's been delivering over the last 10 years consistently. Is it the best? No. Has it been delivering? Yes. Could we make it better? Absolutely. Really welcome comments in the mini budget the other week as well, and commitment to more money and expanding eco. But it can't just be on the energy suppliers, but the energy suppliers are the ones with a supply chain right now. So there has to be this, you know, better combination of actors in this space. And yes, knock-on impact on jobs and skills, and they're nationwide. So absolutely agree, it's an issue, but it's not insurmountable in my view. What I would say on that kind of point around smart meters, I mean, as you know, I'm a long-term advocate for getting the smart meters on the walls. I think that you can't move to having a more flexible system until we have half-hourly settlement and a flexible way of using energy. The benefits case for smart meters was always predicated on energy efficiency, and that's how government justified it over 10 years ago, was around the benefits cases. Once you can see what you're using, you can figure out how to decrease it. That's not been the case, and it has cost a lot of money, I think, to get smart meters on the wall. But we cannot move to a future system without them. So I completely agree, we do need to get them on.
Yeah, in terms of the short, how do we overcome the short-term problem? I mean, there is no immediate quick fix. It's market demand. I don't think there's no government intervention that magics up people who are trained and have done courses and are capable of doing things. Although, you know, some existing people with existing skills can be trained to do certain specific things quite quickly. But I agree with Dara. I think it's about the long-term signals. It's not, you know, the track record over the years of green schemes has not been brilliant, and we need to get a consistent long-term signal that gives people, as I say, from local authorities to institutes of technology, FE colleges, and the like, to know that there's just as we had to provide for offshore wind companies, you had to show them a pipeline going forward so their supply chain would invest and could invest knowing there was business there. We need exactly the same in the skills space. Otherwise, we're going to have people hesitating. We've got to show someone that they've got a long-term career by entering into this. And then what we do know on the more positive side is that when they see a green job, when they see they can be part of it, there's overwhelming desire to be part of the solution. So I know someone from Octopus Energy, Clem, yesterday was talking about the fact that they had to take their ads down immediately having put it up because they were so overwhelmed with the number of people who wanted to get involved, want to be part of solving this. So, you know, we've got a mismatch between actually a tremendous desire to help and us providing the frameworks and the long-term signals that, as Dara said, that means that they can be matched. And on the smart, you know, there's no way we need a more digital, we need a smarter system. We've got to be committed to that. And it's like, if you go go back to my business career, often sitting there, is the business case here for this investment in the IT? Well, a few years later, if you haven't done it, you weren't going to be in the market anymore, even though you couldn't see that at the time. We've got to be digital first. We've got to be smart. We've got to get the information in place, and then we've got to work the system so that it can be as responsive as possible.
Thank you. I think I'm in danger of being stuck in this corner a bit too much. If I can bring the microphone down to the front here and take these two questions first.
Hi, David Blackman representing Utility Week magazine. I suppose this is a question primarily for Graham. There was a lot of speculation a couple of weeks ago that the energy security bill was going to be substantially watered down or abandoned following after Liz Truss became Prime Minister. This contains some really key measures for the future of the energy system, which we're talking about today, like a future systems operator. Can you provide any reassurance to the industry that the government will press on with the energy security bill? Thank you.
Thank you. And pass to the gentleman next to you.
Thanks. Arjan Geuveke, Energy Intensive Users Group. Good question, support that as well. And I have to say, I feel the pain on dealing with DNOs as well. But my question is the following. Should the UK increase its gas storage capacity beyond Rough?
Yeah, Bim, do you want to come in?
So on the first question, for what it's worth, from my perspective and from MPs I speak to, I think that there's a huge amount of support for the bill, so I hope it does come forward. In relation to gas storage capacity, I think that one of the difficulties about talking about the current situation vis-à-vis Russia and energy as a crisis is that people think that it will be over quickly. And I don't just mean a war, I just mean the energy problems. And by the way, this is my colleagues, people in the public, they will often say, well, next year when everything's got better. Well, some of these issues are quite structural, and there's no guarantee of what happens with Russia and Ukraine happening. So we may actually be having to deal with this cost, security, all of the things we've been talking about. We may have to deal with these problems for quite a long time. And we therefore need to make long-term investments that will be expensive and perhaps difficult, like gas storage, because this may be the case for the foreseeable future, for the next few years, until we can speed up our delivery of all the things that the Minister's been talking about. So I think we should do that. But the last thing I wanted to say is simply that we need, over the next couple of years of the Parliament, to not pretend that we can do everything that we've talked about today. I know that nobody ever says that, and we always say that we can do everything and it's just a matter of the will. It's not. They're practical considerations, they're public obstacles, they're random things that happen, they're distractions in politics and government. But for me, if we can deal with some of the grid issues that have been already discussed, the DNOs, if we can make it easier to have more localized pricing, localized systems, if we can do some of that really hard plumbing work, we can set ourselves up for things over the next 5, 10, 15 years in a really effective way. Because what I fear is that through sheer enthusiasm and desire to do the right thing, we almost make a little bit of progress on lots of areas, but don't make sufficient progress on any critical ones by the end of this Parliament.
Graham?
On the energy security bill, that is being reviewed at the moment, but as you rightly say, it's full of very important aspects which are going to help us accelerate the issues that we're talking about today. On gas storage, beyond Rough, I can't give a specific answer on that, but clearly we are reviewing our energy security and look to make sure that we've got that in the best possible position going forward.
Yeah, on the storage point, I think it's not a bad idea, but we do need a mix of renewables. They're faster, quicker, cheaper to deploy, 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. So I do think that we need to be doing lots of things in tandem right now.
Thank you.
Just one thing I mean, one of the benefits, of course, of Rough is that it provides gas storage soon, and potentially can be used for hydrogen storage in the longer term. So it's not purely a function of storage of a fossil fuel.
Thank you. We'll take our final two questions. I've got one over here and two over here.
Thanks. Chris Hewitt from Solar Energy UK. It's a point about the speed of deployment, really. So Rachel and Dara both mentioned it. Solar, utility-scale solar and rooftop are the fastest to deploy. You can build them really, really quickly. Private capital is lining up to do this. There was nothing in the growth plan at all about solar, which was concerning. There was mentioned in the energy security strategy. The British Army is planning 80 solar farms. The Corporation of London is already buying its power cheaply from a solar farm in Dorset. What is the government going to do to accelerate more solar?
Okay, thank you. And if you pass the microphone to the gentleman in front.
Di Richards from Hitachi Energy. We've talked a bit about the lack of access to grid, which is because of a lack of investment. Our system is sort of set up predominantly to allow network companies to invest when there is a proven problem rather than sort of to anticipate the problem and solve that, and that's the sort of Rio process. A question really about whether there's an appetite to look at off-gems processes and try and speed up that and make it easier to anticipate ahead of need. I'm not sure REMA is going to be a big help because a lot of the measures in REMA are actually looking at how to avoid investing in more in the networks.
Brilliant, thank you. Rachel, do you want to come in on the sort of first element about, on the gentleman's question?
Well, I think the question is the government going to do it? And I don't know. But I suppose going back to my earlier point, why is fracking unlikely to happen? Because there is now entrenched public opposition. Why are people hesitant about solar? Because despite a lot of polling, including ours, showing that people broadly support solar, they feel local opposition. So you can rail against governments for this, but this government in particular is not going to do anything now, I think, against the will of its own MPs. So it seems to me the most effective way of trying to speed this up is by spending attention on the local more than the national, which is harder work, but much more likely to succeed.
Thanks. Dara?
No, I think there's a whole other panel discussion in there around local area energy plans and levelling up, I think.
We'll save it for next year. Yeah. And Graham, anything you want to add on either of those points?
Well, I'd like to see that solar speed up, but as Rachel rightly says, we've got to do it in a way which carries communities with us. One of the problems with onshore wind years ago, it predicted at the time when basically people would seek to get turned down as quickly as possible locally so they could go to the inspector and have it imposed, was that there was going to be a backlash. And people didn't listen, and there was a backlash. And it finds political force. So we've got to, I absolutely want to see us accelerate that, but make sure we learn the lessons from the past and we do so in a way that carries people with us. And that means, we've got to do everything as fast as we can, but wandering around the country saying, oh, this is a matter of major national interest and we're stamping it on you, you will even, regardless of the... Sorry? Warehouse roofs are not as cheap as major deployed solar, but I take your point. We need everything, don't we? That's the truth.
All right, thank you. Sorry for those who didn't get a chance to get a question. I know there are lots in the room, but we are unfortunately out of time. But do catch people afterwards from the panel. Thank you to all of you who've joined us today. Thank you to everyone watching online. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Energy UK. And please join me in thanking all of our panelists today. Thank you. Thank you very much.